The last words he said to me that night still echo like glass breaking. "There's no place for you at the table." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Gabriel had mastered the art of quiet cruelty, the kind that slides under your skin and stays there. The Christmas tree shimmered in the corner, gold lights reflected in the half-empty wine glasses. David and his fiancée were laughing at something on their phones. The roast had gone cold. And I, the hostess, stood at the edge of the room, invisible. I had spent 2 days cooking, cleaning, choosing the right linens. I'd placed a sprig of rosemary on every napkin the way my mother used to. It was supposed to smell like home. But when I set the last plate, Gabriel looked at me with that thin, polite smile he used when he wanted to hurt without getting his hands dirty. "Maybe sit this one out, Clara. There's not enough room." Everyone laughed awkwardly, like it was a joke that didn't quite land. I smiled too, because that's what I always did. Inside, something small and final cracked. Later that night, after the laughter turned to dishes clinking and murmured goodnights, I sat alone in the dark kitchen. The house smelled of burnt sugar and pine needles. I could still hear his voice from earlier, smooth and certain, erasing me with a sentence. It wasn't the first time, just the cleanest cut. I remembered other moments, not many, just the ones that mattered. The Christmas in 2008 when he forgot the tree and blamed me for making everything a production. The July evening in 2016 when he laughed at one of my paintings and said, "You're better at decorating than creating." Each time I'd told myself forgiveness was love. But love, I was learning, isn't supposed to feel like disappearing. I stood the chair, scraping softly against the tile, and looked at the long table gleaming in the dim light. The empty chair at the end stared back at me like a dare. Upstairs, the house slept. I packed quietly just the essentials. A few clothes, a notebook, the small box of brushes I hadn't touched in years. I took my coat from the hook by the door, the same one Gabriel used for his wool blazer. My hand brushed against his, hanging there, neatly pressed, smelling faintly of cedar and cologne. For a moment I hesitated. Not because I doubted my decision, but because leaving felt like stepping into a version of myself I'd been too afraid to meet. Then I opened the drawer by the front door, the one where we kept the spare pens and unpaid bills, and found a blank envelope. I wrote his name in small, steady letters, Gabriel. And then, for the first time in 15 years, I wrote without fear. "You told me there was no place for me at the table. You were right. But I've spent too long starving myself to fit your version of love. So tonight I'll eat alone." I paused. The pen trembled slightly, but my hand didn't stop. "Don't come looking. Not yet. You won't find the same woman who stood beside you tonight." I folded the note, taped it to the front door, and stepped out into the snow. The cold hit me hard, but it felt clean, honest, in a way nothing in that house had been for years. The air smelled of pine and chimney smoke. My breath hung in front of me like proof that I still existed. I walked past the glowing windows of neighbors' homes where families laughed over pie, where children argued over gifts. I didn't envy them. Not tonight. When I reached the car, I sat for a long moment before starting the engine. My hands were steady, but my heart pounded in strange, unfamiliar rhythm. Not fear, not sadness, something sharper. Freedom, maybe. Or the first taste of it. The headlights swept across the snow-covered yard one last time. Through the window, I saw the edge of the dining table, the silverware gleaming faintly. I thought of all the years I'd spent setting that table, holiday after holiday, birthday after birthday, creating beauty for a man who only saw control. Now he'd have his perfect table, and I'd have the world beyond it. As the road curved away from the neighborhood, I rolled down the window. Cold air rushed in, stinging my cheeks, numbing my fingers. I let it. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears could wait until I had somewhere safe to put them. The radio hummed softly, a Christmas song, cheerful and wrong. I turned it off. Silence suited me better. Snow swirled across the headlights, thick and blinding, but I kept driving. Somewhere out there was the coast, Rockport, the place my aunt used to talk about when I was a child. "The sea there can wash the ache right out of you," she'd said once. I didn't know if that was true, but I was ready to find out. Before I reached the highway, I pulled over one last time. The world was quiet, just the whisper of snow falling against metal and glass. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, tired, older than I remembered, but alive. "You did it," I whispered to her. "You left." The woman in the mirror didn't smile, but her eyes were clear. I put the car in gear, and for the first time in years, I didn't look back. The highway was nearly empty that night. Snow flurried across the windshield in diagonal streaks, each flake illuminated for a heartbeat, before vanishing into darkness. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, the heater blowing weakly, the silence inside the car so complete that I could hear the faint ticking of the dashboard clock. Midnight, Christmas Eve. Most people were settling into warmth fireplaces, laughter, another glass of wine. I was chasing a coastline I'd only seen once as a child, guided by memory and the dull glow of interstate signs. Every few miles I repeated the same phrase under my breath. "Just drive, Clara, just drive." Somewhere past Portsmouth, I stopped at a rest area. The parking lot lights glowed harsh against the falling snow. Inside, the vending machines hummed, offering snacks behind scratched plastic. I bought a cup of coffee, lukewarm, burnt, but it was something. I sat by the window watching the snow gather on the hood of my car. That's when the first doubt crept in. What if he woke up, found the note, and laughed, told his friends over brunch that I'd finally lost it? I could hear it, the amused disbelief, the performance of concern. Gabriel was excellent at that. He'd charm anyone into thinking he was the patient husband of a difficult woman. But this time, I reminded myself there was no one left to convince. I took another sip of bitter coffee, feeling it scrape down my throat. Freedom, it seemed, didn't taste sweet at first. The next morning, the sun rose pale and hesitant through a sky the color of steel. I'd driven all night, stopping only for gas and more coffee. The road narrowed as I left the interstate, winding past pine forests and shuttered motels. A sign appeared, "Welcome to Rockport." The town looked exactly as I remembered, or maybe as I needed it to be. Gray, sea-white boats tied to the docks and houses painted in colors that had faded gracefully with time. The air smelled of salt and cold iron. I parked near the harbor and just sat there staring at the water. It moved with the slow, heavy rhythm of something eternal. I thought of the table back home, the plates, the laughter, the way Gabriel had turned to refill his glass as if dismissing me from existence. And now, here I was, a ghost in reverse, vanished from his world, visible again in my own. By noon, I found a small inn called the Driftwood House. The sign swung in the wind, paint peeling but still welcoming. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and coffee drifted from the lobby. A woman in her 60s stood behind the counter, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun. "Checking in, honey?" she asked, her accent warm, coastal. "Yes," I said. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. "Just for a few nights." She gave me a knowing look, the kind people give when they've seen more stories than they'll ever tell. "You can stay as long as you need. Holidays are tough for some folks." Her name tag read Margaret. As she handed me the key, she added softly, "Coffee's fresh in the kitchen. You look like you could use a cup that doesn't taste like despair." I almost laughed. It felt strange, like stretching a muscle that had forgotten how to move. My room overlooked the ocean. The window was frosted, but through it I could see the water, restless, silver gray, alive. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence here was different. Not empty. Just patient. For the first time since I'd left, exhaustion caught up to me. I lay back, boots still on, and drifted into sleep. I woke to the smell of baking bread. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I saw the ocean through the window, the room bathed in the soft orange light of late afternoon, and remembered I'd left. I padded downstairs. Margaret was in the kitchen kneading dough on a wooden counter. "Thought I heard you stirring," she said without looking up. "I made soup. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep you upright." The table beside her held 2 bowls. Only 2. I hesitated. Sit, she said gently, wiping her hands on a towel. No one should eat alone on Christmas, not even if they think they deserve to. Her words hit deeper than she knew. I sat down. The soup was hot, full of vegetables, and something I couldn't name, thyme maybe. It tasted like home, or at least the memory of it. We ate mostly in silence until she asked, "You from around here?" "Boston," I said. "I needed a break." She nodded, eyes kind but shrewd. People come here for two reasons: to find something or to leave something behind. Sometimes both. I looked out the window at the ocean, the waves folding into each other endlessly. "Maybe both," I said softly. After dinner, I walked down to the docks. The wind had picked up sharp and wet, carrying the brine of the sea. My boots crunched on the frozen boards. Lights from the fishing boats flickered in the distance, soft and human against the wide dark. I closed my eyes and let the cold bite my cheeks. I didn't feel lost anymore. Just unmoored. There's a difference. Unmoored meant I could drift anywhere. When I returned to the inn, Margaret was turning off the lobby lights. "Tomorrow's Christmas," she said. "Most places will be closed, but there's a small cafe up the road that stays open. The owner's daughter paints. You might like her." "Thank you," I said. She smiled. "You'll sleep better tonight." I did. For the first time in years, I slept without waiting for someone to come to bed beside me. And in the morning, the world was still. Christmas morning arrived quietly. No carols, no clinking dishes, no laughter echoing down polished hallways, only the steady sigh of waves against the harbor wall. I woke to pale light spilling through the curtains, dust motes drifting like slow snowflakes. For a moment, I lay still, listening. Somewhere downstairs, Margaret moved about the kitchen, humming something tuneless. The smell of baking scones reached my room, warm and buttery, mingling with the salt of the sea air. It was the gentlest kind of awakening, one that asked nothing of me. I pulled on jeans, a sweater that smelled faintly of cedar, and my thickest coat. When I came downstairs, Margaret was pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. "Or at least, good morning." "Merry Christmas," I managed. She studied me for a beat, then smiled. "There's a cafe just a short walk up the road. The Blue Gull. Run by Ellen and her daughter. They keep it open for the strays like us. You'll fit right in." There was no pity in her tone, only understanding. That made me want to go even more. Outside, the air was crisp and sharp enough to sting. Rockport's main street lay hushed beneath a layer of snow, the kind that makes everything look softer, even the broken fences. Storefronts were dark, their wreaths frozen in place, but from somewhere ahead, I caught a faint melody, a guitar maybe. The cafe sat at the corner near the harbor, its windows fogged from warmth inside. A sign in blue paint read, "The Blue Gull Cafe. Open hearts, hot coffee." Inside, the world glowed. A wood stove crackled in the corner, and garlands of evergreen hung above the windows. A few locals sat scattered at the tables, fishermen, an older couple reading the paper, a teenager sketching in a notebook. And behind the counter stood a woman with cropped hair and paint smudged on her wrist. "Welcome," she said, her voice carrying that calm energy of someone who had built peace and planned to keep it. "Coffee?" "Yes, please." She poured a steaming mug and slid it across the counter. "First one's on the house. Christmas special." I smiled, wrapping my hands around the mug. "Thank you. I'm staying at the Driftwood House." "Ah," she said, nodding. "Then you've already met Margaret. She's the town's unofficial guardian angel. I'm Ellen." Her name hit me with a flicker of recognition. Margaret had mentioned her. The painter. We talked as she refilled sugar jars and wiped down the counter. She'd moved here from Boston years ago. "City made me paint what people wanted to see," she said, leaning on her elbows. "Here I paint what I actually feel. Sometimes the sea. Sometimes the silence." I told her in the simplest words I could that I used to paint too, that I'd stopped. Ellen didn't press for details. She just said, "Then start again. You're in the right place for it." Her certainty startled me. It wasn't advice, it was permission. I took my coffee to a small table near the window. Outside, snow fell gently on the harbor. Inside, warmth bloomed through the room like a living thing. For the first time in years, I felt still enough to notice the small details, the way the light hit the rim of my cup, the smell of cinnamon from the pastry case, the hum of Ellen's daughter tuning a guitar in the corner. She began to play soft, familiar chords that tugged at something buried deep. I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me. The song was "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," but slower, stripped bare of its cheer. There was melancholy in it, yes, but also resilience. Later, Ellen brought over a plate with a cranberry scone. "You'll need more than coffee if you're going to stay warm," she said. As I ate, she studied me with a painter's gaze, not intrusive, just curious. "You look like someone who's come from somewhere hard," she said quietly. I met her eyes. "You could say that." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe the sea called you here. It does that sometimes. Brings in the ones who need to start over." I didn't answer, but something in my chest loosened. When I left the cafe, the snow had stopped. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and sunlight caught on the ice along the rocks. I walked down to the pier, boots crunching against the wood. The water below looked endless. I stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at my hair, thinking about how quiet survival can be. No one sees the moment a woman decides she's done being small. It's not dramatic. No slam doors, no fireworks. It's just one quiet breath, one step toward the unknown, and the faint sound of snow falling behind her. That was my Christmas morning. By afternoon, I'd returned to the driftwood house. Margaret was reading by the fire, glasses perched low on her nose. "Did you find the cafe?" she asked without looking up. "I did. And Ellen?" Her smile deepened. "Ah, Ellen. She has a way of showing people who they are without saying much. Did she give you her speech about painting again?" I laughed softly. "Something like that." "She means it," Margaret said. "Lost a husband once. Opened that cafe the year after. Said she wanted a place where people could find warmth even when the world forgot them." That quiet truth settled in me like a seed. That night, as the fire burned low, I opened my old sketchbook. The pages smelled faintly of dust and neglect. My pencil hovered above the paper, uncertain. Then I began to draw. Not Gabriel's face, not our house, just the sea, restless, unending, full of movement. My hand shook at first, then steadied. The lines curved and crossed until they resembled something alive. It wasn't beautiful, but it was honest. And maybe I thought that was a start. The days after Christmas passed quietly, one folding into the next like pages of a soft, slow book. Rockport emptied after the holidays. The tourists had gone and the town exhaled. The harbor froze in places, trapping reflections of gulls mid-flight. The only sounds were the distant moan of a foghorn and the scrape of Margaret's shovel as she cleared snow from the steps. I began to fall into rhythm: morning coffee with Margaret, afternoons sketching by the window, evenings reading until the words blurred into dreams. Freedom, it turned out, didn't shout. It whispered. On the third day, I walked to the Blue Gull again. Ellen waved from behind the counter, her cheeks pink from the stove's heat. "You came back?" she said, smiling. "That's a good sign." I smiled. "Guess I'm predictable." She poured me coffee and nodded toward a corner table. "There's an art group that meets here on Thursdays. Nothing formal, just folks who like to make a mess with paint. You'd fit right in." Her invitation startled me more than it should have. For years, Gabriel had made a sport of mocking hobby artists, calling them people with too much time and not enough talent. I'd stopped painting, stopped sharing, stopped trying. But the warmth in Ellen's tone left no room for shame. "Thursday, then," I said. That afternoon, I sat by the harbor with my sketchbook. The sky had turned the pale color of pewter, the kind of light that made everything look fragile. I drew the boats rocking gently, their ropes creaking against the docks. As I sketched, the wind lifted the corner of my paper. I pressed it down, laughing softly to myself, and then froze. There, caught beneath the edge of the bench, was a folded envelope. Weather-worn, the paper soft from damp air. My name, written in a familiar hand. Clara. My stomach tightened. I looked around. The pier was empty save for a lone gull. I unfolded the letter. Clara, I don't know where you are, but I know you didn't go far. You never do. I've been calling, but your phone's off. David says you left a note. I found it. You made your point. Come home. G. No apology, no recognition, just command wrapped in civility, the way he always disguised control as concern. I stared at the page until the ink blurred. Then I tore it once, then again, the pieces fluttering into the sea breeze. That night I told Margaret. He must have driven here, she said, her brow furrowing, or sent someone to drop it off. Maybe, but I'm not going back. She nodded, setting down her knitting. I didn't think you would. There was silence for a while, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then she said softly, I opened this place after my husband died. People thought I was running away. Maybe I was. But sometimes leaving isn't escaping. It's choosing to live. Her words sank deep. Did it get easier? I asked. She smiled faintly. No, but it got real. And real is better than easy. The next morning, I drove into town to buy paint. The art supply store was small, its windows fogged from heat. The owner, a man with white eyebrows and paint-stained fingers, helped me pick out what I needed. Starting again, huh? He said as he bagged my brushes. Yes, I said, starting again. Outside, the sky had cleared. The snow glittered like powdered glass. That Thursday, I joined Ellen's art group. The cafe smelled of turpentine and cinnamon rolls, an odd but comforting mix. Around the long wooden table sat 6 people, a fisherman painting gulls, a high school teacher sketching her dog, an older woman sculpting tiny clay shells. Ellen greeted me with a grin. Everyone, this is Clara. She's one of us now. The phrase hit me harder than expected. One of us. I hadn't been part of anything in so long. As we painted, conversation flowed easily, stories of lost jobs, new beginnings, broken hearts mended by salt air. No one asked about my past. They just handed me a brush and space to exist. I painted for hours, losing track of time. When I finally stepped back, the canvas showed a small white house by the sea, its lights glowing through a storm. It's beautiful, Ellen said, standing behind me. It's not done, I murmured. She smiled. Neither are you. Later, walking back to the inn, I noticed something fluttering against the front door. Another letter? This one shorter. Clara, please stop this. You're scaring people. You've made your point. Come home before you make a mistake you can't fix. G. The snow began to fall again, slow and deliberate. I stood there until the ink started to run, then let the paper drift into the snow. For the first time, his words didn't sting. They sounded small, smaller than the wind, smaller than me. That night, I dreamed of the ocean, not calm, but alive, waves crashing and reshaping the shore. I woke to the steady creak of the inn settling in the cold. My sketchbook lay open on the nightstand, the unfinished painting staring back at me. I took up the brush again and filled in the last light in the window of the little white house. When I was done, I whispered, "There's room for me now." Outside, the wind howled through the eaves like a song. By the first week of January, the wind turned mean, the kind that didn't just blow, it pushed. It clawed at window panes and howled through the narrow streets like something ancient. Margaret warned me it was coming. Every winter we get one that tests us, she said, laying out candles on the counter. Storm like this'll strip the paint off your soul if you let it. She wasn't wrong. By dusk, the harbor disappeared behind a wall of white. The sky pressed low, the world swallowed by wind and noise. Inside the driftwood house, the lights flickered. I lit one of her candles anyway, just in case. The glow filled the room, softly pooling across my sketches. I'd been painting all week small things, simple things. The sea, a window, the curl of smoke from a chimney. But tonight I couldn't concentrate. The storm pressed against the walls, demanding to be noticed. Around 8, the power went out completely. Silence fell, broken only by the roar outside. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat near the window. The candle flame danced in the draft. And then headlights. Through the curtain of snow, a pair of beams cut across the drive, steady, deliberate. A car door slammed. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then came the knock, hard, sharp, unmistakable. My heart stuttered. I knew that rhythm. Gabriel. Clara. His voice muffled by the storm but clear enough to pierce through. Clara, open the door. We need to talk. I didn't move. Clara, louder now. This is insane. You can't hide here forever. Margaret's footsteps sounded in the hallway. You expecting someone? I shook my head. My mouth had gone dry. She peered through the frosted window, then turned to me, her eyes narrowing. That him. I nodded. Without a word, she set her jaw and opened the door just a crack, the wind screaming in. What do you want? She asked, her voice firm. I'm looking for my wife. Gabriel shouted, snow plastering his hair. She left without saying a word. Margaret's hand tightened on the door. Then maybe you should take that as the word she meant. He glared, his voice rising above the wind. You don't understand. This is between us. She didn't flinch. Not anymore. And she shut the door. The sound of it closing echoed like a verdict. He pounded on it again, once, twice, then stopped. For several long seconds, only the storm answered. I sank into the chair by the window, every muscle trembling. I hadn't realized until that moment just how afraid of him I still was, not of violence, but of his voice, his certainty, the way he made his truth sound like law. Margaret put a hand on my shoulder. He can't hurt you here. I know, I whispered. But he still can't stand being told no. Outside, the headlights stayed fixed on the house, 2 unblinking eyes. After a while, the engine revved. The lights swung away, swallowed by the storm. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes. He's gone, Margaret said softly. But I wasn't sure. Gabriel never left when someone else decided the timing. That night, sleep refused to come. Every creak of the old inn sounded like footsteps, every gust of wind like a door opening. I got up and walked downstairs. The fire had burned low, just red coals pulsing in the dark. I sat before it, wrapping my arms around my knees. In the flicker of the embers, I saw memories play like film reels, the early years when he'd laugh with me in the kitchen, when we'd dance barefoot to old jazz records, when I thought love was about staying. But the image twisted. His laughter turned sharp, his words careful and cold. Control wears many faces, I realized. It can smile, it can charm it, can say there's no place for you at the table and still call it love. Tears came, not loud but steady. They weren't for him. They were for the years I'd given away piece by piece, thinking I was keeping the peace. At dawn, the storm broke. The world outside was unrecognizable, a landscape sculpted by wind and silence. Snow draped across rooftops, thick and luminous. The air was sharp and clean, the kind that made lungs ache in the best way. I stepped outside, boots sinking deep into the drift. The inn's porch overlooked the harbor, now buried beneath white, only the masts of boats poking through like skeletal fingers. And there, at the edge of the drive, Gabriel's tire tracks. They ended abruptly, turning back toward the road. Gone. I let out a long breath, my chest unclenching for the first time in hours. When I returned inside, Margaret was setting a kettle on the stove. The power was still out, but she smiled faintly. You handled that well, she said. I didn't do anything. She shook her head. You stayed. Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. We sat together, sipping tea brewed over the fire. The room was dim but warm. I think he'll come back again, I said quietly. Maybe, she replied, but next time you'll be ready. Her calm was contagious. I felt it settle over me like a blanket. Later, Ellen stopped by, wrapped in her heavy coat, cheeks flushed from the cold. She brought a lantern and 2 loaves of bread. "Power's out all over town," she said. "Figured you could use some light and carbs." Margaret chuckled, taking the bread. Ellen turned to me. "You okay?" I hesitated, then nodded. "He was here last night." Her face hardened. "He won't be again." I wanted to believe her. But even if he did come back, I knew something had shifted. The fear wasn't the same. It no longer owned me. That evening, as the sun set pink over the snow, I took my canvas and paints to the window. I began to paint the storm not as destruction, but as rebirth. I mixed blues and whites until they became something between chaos and light. The brush moved easily now. My hands remembered. My heart did too. I painted the wind-bending trees, snow curling like smoke, and a woman standing in the doorway of a house facing it all unafraid. When I finished, I whispered to the empty room, "You can come, Gabriel." But I'm not the same woman waiting inside anymore. By mid-January, the snow began to melt, leaving behind wet streets that gleamed like glass. The town stirred again, fishermen repairing nets, children sliding down icy hills, the cafe's doorbell jingling like a heartbeat. For me, something else was thawing too. Fear, maybe. Or silence. Ellen's art group had become my anchor. Every Thursday, I'd walk to the Blue Gull with my sketchbook under one arm, the wind sharp on my cheeks, and my breath a visible trail behind me. Inside, there was always laughter, always the smell of coffee and turpentine. And for the first time in years, a place that felt like belonging. One afternoon, Ellen looked at the small stack of paintings I'd done since the storm seascape's winter streets, the faint outline of a woman at a window. "You ever think about showing these?" she asked. I laughed. "You mean like, in public?" "Yeah," she said, grinning. "That's where the people are." I'm not ready. No one ever is. But the town's having its winter art walk next month, Gallery of Light. Local artists open their doors, people wander and drink, bad wine, and pretend to know about brushwork. You should be part of it. I started to protest, but Ellen's look stopped me. It wasn't a question, it was faith. The next few weeks blurred in quiet work. I painted every morning by the window of the driftwood house, the sea changing colors with the hour slate silver pale green. Margaret would pass by with her tray of muffins, peeking at my progress. "That one looks like hope," she'd say, pointing at the canvas where sunlight broke through clouds. Her kindness became a rhythm I could trust. She'd never ask for the full story, but I knew she saw it all anyway. The exhaustion behind my eyes, the careful steadiness in my hands. One evening, as I packed up my brushes, a letter slid under the door. I froze. The paper was damp from the melting snow outside, the handwriting unmistakable. "Clara, I drove up last week. You wouldn't open the door. I'm not your enemy. I'm trying to understand. You can't just erase a marriage. We have history. You can't throw that away like paint water. Call me, please. G." I read it twice, then once more. There was no rage this time, no trembling hands. Just an odd, clean kind of sadness, the kind that comes when you realize the thing that used to rule your world has lost its power. I folded the letter and placed it in the fireplace, watched the flame catch curl and turn his words into ash. The next morning, I painted that too. By February, Rockport's Gallery of Light came to life. Windows all over town glowed warm against the cold, each one a small defiance against winter. Ellen's cafe had turned its walls into a gallery. The smell of coffee mixed with candle wax laughter mingling with the sound of boots stomping off snow. Local musicians played soft jazz in the corner. Ellen pinned up my paintings on a side wall beneath a string of white lights. I stood there awkwardly, hands in my coat pockets, feeling both too visible and invisible at once. Margaret arrived first, carrying a basket of cookies. "I baked something for courage," she whispered, pressing one into my hand. Soon, others drifted in: the fishermen from the art group, the teacher, even a few tourists, curious about the woman who paints the sea like it's alive. I tried not to listen to their comments, but one voice reached me. A young woman stood before my painting of the storm, the one with the woman in the doorway. "She looks strong," the woman said softly. "Like she's been through hell, but it didn't win." Ellen caught my eye and smiled. Later that evening, I stepped outside for air. The night was crisp, stars scattered over the dark water. From inside, music drifted out, slow, easy content. For a moment, I felt a pang of loneliness, sharp but clean. Not the aching kind that came from being unwanted, the gentle kind that reminds you you're still human. Margaret joined me, her scarf wrapped tight. "You did good," she said. "I didn't think anyone would care." "They don't need to care," she said. "They just need to see. That's how healing works. It's contagious." I smiled. "You always sound like you've lived a dozen lives." She laughed softly. "Maybe I have. Or maybe I just listen." We stood there a while longer, the harbor lights trembling on the water like candle flames. When I returned home that night, I noticed something at the door again. Not a letter this time, but a small envelope with no handwriting. Inside, a check. $10,000 from Gabriel. No note, just his name scrawled on the corner. For a long time, I stared at it, unsure whether it was guilt manipulation or his idea of redemption. Then I placed it in a drawer, unopened since. Some debts couldn't be paid in paper. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The horizon glowed faint pink over the sea. I made coffee, opened the window, and breathed in the salt air. A gull screamed somewhere far off. The world smelled like thawing snow and wood smoke. I thought about how Gabriel had tried to fix everything the only way he knew how, with money, with control, with gestures that never reached the heart. And I thought about how I had built something small, but real. Paint under my fingernails, coffee shared with friends, my own table by the sea. It wasn't dramatic, this new life, but it was mine. That afternoon, I visited Ellen at the cafe. She handed me an envelope addressed to me in neat script. "Someone dropped this off this morning," she said. Inside was a short note from Mark, Gabriel's brother. "Clara, I don't know if you'll read this. I just wanted to say I saw him after you left. He's different. Quieter. He doesn't say much, but I think he finally sees it. What he did. What he lost. You don't owe him anything. But I thought you should know. Take care of yourself. Mark." I folded the letter, my chest tightening, not in regret, but in something close to closure. "Bad news?" Ellen asked. "No," I said, smiling faintly. "Just news." She poured me another cup of coffee. "To new chapters," she said. "To new chapters," I echoed. And outside, the light returned to Rockport. Spring came slow to Rockport. The snow retreated in cautious steps, revealing grass flattened and yellowed, like something waking from a long dream. Seagulls returned to the harbor, shrieking over half-thawed water. The wind softened, trading its bite for a cool breath that smelled faintly of salt and pine. Every morning, I'd open the window of my small room at the Driftwood house and listen to the world start again. Boats creaking against their moorings, the shuffle of Margaret's slippers in the hallway. Ellen's laughter echoing from the cafe down the road. It was life, quiet, imperfect, but undeniably alive. I'd moved from the inn into a small cottage a few blocks away. Margaret helped me find it, one of those weathered places with peeling paint and a stubborn door that always needed a shove to close. The rent was modest, the view was priceless. From my kitchen window, I could see the harbor light blinking each evening like a heartbeat. I spent the first week making it mine, scrubbing floors, unpacking the few things I'd brought, buying secondhand furniture from the shop near Main Street. Ellen gave me an old easel, and Margaret showed up with a chipped ceramic lamp that looked like it had seen 3 lifetimes. "You'll need a table," Margaret said one afternoon, hands on her hips. "I'll find one," I told her. She smirked. "No, you'll build one. That's the rule." The rule. Everyone who stays in Rockport for good builds their own table. Ask Ellen. Ask any of us. It's not just furniture, it's proof. Proof of what? That you've stopped waiting for someone else to make room for you. I didn't answer. But that night, the words sat in me like an ember. A week later, I found the wood washed ashore behind the docks, warped and weathered but strong. The boards smelled of salt and thyme. With Ellen's help, I borrowed tools from a fisherman named Sam, who seemed amused that I was determined to do it myself. I worked through the morning, sanding the wood until my arms ached, brushing off the white dust that clung to my hair. It wasn't easy. Nothing worth reclaiming ever is. Margaret stopped by one afternoon with lemonade. "Looks sturdy," she said, watching me fit the boards together. "It's crooked," I admitted. "So are most good things," she said. "Keeps life interesting." When I was done, I ran my fingers over the rough surface. It wasn't perfect. Some edges still uneven, a few nail heads visible, but it was solid. Real. My table. That evening, I set a single plate on it, a candle, a bowl of soup I'd made myself. Outside, the sun slipped into the ocean, leaving behind a trail of pink and gold. As I ate, I thought of all the tables I'd sat at before, ones where I'd learned to be small, to listen, to nod in the right places. This one was different. It didn't demand silence. It didn't require permission. Here I was, both guest and host. A few days later, a package arrived. No return address, just a Boston postmark. Inside a small wooden box. For a moment I hesitated. Then I opened it. Inside was one of my old paintbrushes, the one I'd left behind in the studio at home. The handle was chipped, the bristles worn, but tied to it was a note in Gabriel's handwriting. "I found this. I thought you'd want it back. I hope you're okay. G." That was all. No plea, no justification, just 3 short sentences. I placed the brush on my table beside a jar of wildflowers I'd picked that morning. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or pity, only a quiet gratitude that he'd finally stopped trying to write my story for me. In February, the Gallery of Light had been my beginning. By April, Ellen convinced me to display my work permanently at her cafe. People started asking about the woman who painted the sea. Some bought prints. One even commissioned a piece for their home. It wasn't fame, but it was purpose. Ellen teased that I was becoming a local fixture. Margaret said I was finally rooted. I liked that word, rooted. It meant staying not out of fear, but choice. One afternoon, as I packed up prints for a tourist couple, Ellen asked, "Do you miss him?" The question didn't sting. "No," I said honestly, "but sometimes I miss who I thought I was when I loved him." She nodded. "Then keep painting her. You'll find out who she really was." By summer, the harbor bloomed with color again. The town hosted its annual lobster festival, filling the air with laughter, music, and the smell of butter and seaweed. Children ran barefoot, and strings of lights hung over the docks, like stars brought close enough to touch. Ellen dragged me out of the house that night, insisting I needed fun that wasn't in grayscale. Margaret joined us, wrapped in her old red shawl. We danced badly. We ate too much. And for the first time in years, I laughed so hard my ribs ached. When the fireworks began, I stood by the water, watching the bursts of red and gold scatter across the sea. I thought about all the versions of me I'd left behind. The woman waiting at the table, the one driving north through snow, the one who built her own. They weren't gone. They were all part of the same map that led here. Sometimes I still dream of Gabriel's voice, not cruel, just distant, like something from another lifetime. In those dreams, I always turn toward the sound, and every time I find myself standing before my table candle burning low, the sea whispering through the open window. I sit down, alone but not lonely. And I whisper to the wind, to the world, to any woman who might need to hear it. If someone ever tells you there's no place for you at their table, build your own, paint it your color, light your candle, and never wait to be invited again. That's how my story ends, not with revenge, but return. Not with bitterness, but breath. The sea outside my window keeps moving as it always has, and I keep painting it. Not to capture it, but to remind myself it can never be owned. Neither can I. If this story found you on a quiet night when your heart feels too heavy or your house too empty, then I hope it reminds you of this simple truth. You are allowed to start again. You are allowed to take up space. And somewhere, there's always a table waiting for you, even if you have to build it yourself.